Good afternoon to you, Dr. Roach.
Good afternoon.
What do you make of this? Is it a good idea? Your members are clearly under a lot of pressure. Would it be a good idea if more teachers were brought in from abroad?
Well, it's absolutely essential that we address the teacher recruitment and retention crisis, something the government is spectacularly failing to do. We're seeing vacancies up, we're seeing ITT, initial teacher training recruitment down, and we're seeing 73% of teachers saying they want to quit the job. Teaching is no longer a profession of choice for today's UK graduates. And today's, indication of this measure to recruit teachers from overseas is really a sticking plaster from the government because of their failure to fix the underlying causes of that teacher supply crisis. And that's about decent pay and decent working conditions.
I know that you're still in dispute with the government, as I understand it, balloting again on perhaps more industrial action. But given that you would acknowledge that we do have this shortfall, would you accept that this is a good idea, even if it is for the short term? I mean, it seems to be an experiment, a pilot for the next year.
You know, the government's got to stop experimenting with children's education. Parents want to know that their children are going to be guaranteed a qualified teacher in every class, in every subject. And there's nothing wrong with recruiting teachers from any part of the UK or indeed around the world. But actually, the underlying issue here is that too few graduates in the UK are choosing teaching, and too many teachers who are experienced in the UK are choosing to quit the job altogether. The impact of that is considerable on children's education. But of course, short-term measures don't provide a long-term fix. And what we've been saying is the government needs to get back into the room to talk to us about a long-term plan, which is about pay restoration and addressing the underlying causes of excessive workload and long working hours, which are driving too many teachers out of the profession.
But they could do both, couldn't they? I mean, they could address those. And in the short term, given that we've got a shortage of teachers, and they are going to ensure that any people coming from countries such as Ghana, India, we understand Nigeria, Australia, New Zealand, they've all got to have a degree. They've got to have recognised teacher training qualifications. I mean, presumably that would be something that would help pupils who need to have a decent teacher in their schools.
And of course, the government could do both, but the government is choosing not to do both. For months now, we've been calling upon Gillian Keegan to get back in a room to talk about, to address those root causes, how to address the underlying drivers of the teacher supply crisis. So why is the government choosing not to get around the table with us? And moreover, when we're talking about recruiting teachers from overseas, how is the government intending to keep those teachers here if the working conditions of those teachers, frankly, are not good enough and they are not encouraged to stay in the UK? Of course, there's a wider issue, a moral or ethical issue around why the government thinks it's okay to try to fix a UK teacher supply crisis by plundering teacher talent from abroad. There are big issues here that do need to be addressed. No one's pretending otherwise, that we've got to ensure that we've got teachers in classrooms the length and breadth of the country. But in the long term, we're only going to do that by addressing the pay crisis and ensuring that long working hours crisis, which is driving teachers out of the profession, is resolved once and for all.
The numbers expected to take part in this scheme, at least initially, are relatively small, in the few hundreds. But, I mean, are you surprised to hear a government that's talking about getting down net migration coming up with a scheme like this? Because, I mean, presumably, as we already know, many other sectors of our society would say, well, yes, we need staff from abroad. We know the health service relies on them, the care sector, hospitality, agriculture, just about every sector you could think of would say, well, we need, at least in the short term, workers from overseas to fill the gaps in staffing that we have.
Yeah, it's profoundly unhelpful, I think, for the government to be continually playing a narrative around getting tough on migration, when the reality is that in many areas of the economy, migration is absolutely essential to the UK's economy.
But you don't want
And
them coming to fill the teaching posts.
absolutely, we have not suggested that we don't want overseas talent coming to the UK. Quite the contrary. But the scale of the problem that the government is facing in teaching is not going to be solved by recruiting a few hundred teachers from overseas. We've got to recruit more UK graduates and retain more of our experienced teachers here at home to stay in the profession, and they're not going to do that if they're seeing their pay in real terms deteriorating year after year, and they're not going to do that if their workload and working hours are simply unsustainable.